You ever trust someone completely, share a space with them, split the bills, live side by side, and then one day without any warning they look you dead in the eye and decide you're the problem? That's exactly what happened to me. And what I did next. Let's just say karma had a little help. Welcome back to the Payback Files. Stay with me until the very end of this one because the twist, I promise you, is something you won't see coming. Let me paint the picture for you. I'd been living with my roommate Marcus for almost 2 years. We found the apartment together, we negotiated the lease together, and as far as I knew we were good. Not best friends, sure, but solid. Respectful. The kind of roommate situation most people dream about. Or so I thought. About 3 months before everything blew up, I started noticing little shifts. Marcus was spending more time on the phone behind closed doors. He started bringing this new girlfriend around constantly, every single day, and she had this habit of looking at me like I was renting space in a hotel she owned. She'd walk through the common area without so much as a nod, use my things without asking, and one morning I came out to find her sitting at my spot at the kitchen table, helping herself to the coffee I'd bought. I let it go. I kept telling myself it wasn't worth the argument. Then one evening Marcus knocked on my door. I thought maybe he wanted to talk about the noise or the schedule or something normal. Instead, he sat down on the edge of my chair, looked at me with this strange calm, and told me that he and his girlfriend had decided they wanted the apartment to themselves. He said he was giving me 60 days to find somewhere else. I just stared at him. I genuinely could not process the words. My name was on the lease. My name had been on that lease from day one. We signed it together. I wasn't a subletter. I wasn't a guest. I was a co-tenant with every legal right he had, and he was sitting there telling me to leave as if I were a piece of furniture he'd decided didn't match the room anymore. I kept my face completely neutral. I nodded slowly and said I'd think about it, and then I closed the door, sat on my bed and started thinking, not about where I'd moved but about what was actually happening here. Here's what most people would have done. Panicked, called friends, cried about it, maybe sent a few angry texts. And look, I won't pretend I wasn't upset. But somewhere underneath that anger, something colder and sharper kicked in. I've always believed that when someone comes at you without warning, the worst thing you can do is react immediately. The best thing you can do is pause, observe, and make absolutely sure you understand the full picture before you move a single piece on the board. So I started doing my homework. I pulled out the lease and read every single line, not just the parts one remembered. And that's when I found it. Right there in black and white. Both tenants had equal rights to occupy the unit, and neither party could unilaterally remove the other without written mutual agreement or a court order. Marcus had no legal ground to stand on. None. He couldn't make me leave. He couldn't force me out. He had essentially tried to bluff me out of my own home. Now here's where the story gets interesting because I had a choice. I could have walked into the living room right then, dropped the lease on the coffee table and told him exactly what I'd found. Easy. Cling. Done. But I didn't. Because something still didn't add up. Why was he so confident? Why had he come to me like it was already decided? That kind of certainty doesn't come from nowhere. So I started paying closer attention. Not in a paranoid way, I wasn't going through his things or listening at doors. I just started noticing. And within a week I had my answer. I found out, through a mutual friend, that Marcus had already reached out to our landlord. He'd told him that I had moved out voluntarily and that he'd be taking over the lease solo, starting the following month. He had already started the paperwork to remove my name. He hadn't asked me to leave because he thought he could convince me. He'd asked me to leave because he was already in the process of erasing me, banking on the idea that I wouldn't check, wouldn't push back, wouldn't know my rights. He figured I'd just pack my bags and disappear quietly while he handed my half of the apartment to his girlfriend. That was the moment everything shifted for me. This wasn't just a disagreement between roommates anymore. This was someone attempting to commit fraud against me, and I wasn't going to stand there and let it happen. I want to pause here for just a second because I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, just move out, it's not worth it, find somewhere better. And honestly, under normal circumstances I might have agreed with you. But this was different. He had lied to the landlord. He had told him I was already gone when I was very much still there. He had initiated a legal process based on false information. That's not a roommate dispute, that's fraud, and it had the potential to destroy my rental history, affect my credit, and follow me for years. Walking away quietly would have meant letting that stand unchallenged. So I made a plan. And I executed it carefully, patiently, and with zero drama. Step 1. I contacted the landlord myself that same week. I didn't mention Marcus or anything he'd said. I simply reached out to confirm the current status of our lease and requested a copy of any recent correspondence related to the unit. What came back confirmed everything. Marcus had sent a written notice claiming I had vacated voluntarily. I now had that in writing. Step 2. I sent the landlord a formal letter, certified mail return receipt, clarifying that I had not vacated, that I was still a legal co-tenant, and that any modifications to the lease made without my knowledge or consent were unauthorized. I attached a copy of the original lease. I kept my tone professional and completely calm. No accusations, no drama, just facts. Step 3. I consulted a tenants' rights attorney. Most people don't know this, but in many cities, initial consultations are free, and tenant protections are remarkably strong. Within one meeting, I had a clear picture of exactly where I stood legally and exactly what remedies were available to me if things escalated. And Marcus? He had no idea any of this was happening. He was still walking around the apartment like he'd already won. He was making plans. He started bringing his girlfriend's furniture in. He had the audacity to ask me one evening if I'd started looking at other places yet, with this little smile like he was doing me a favor. I smiled back. I said I was still figuring things out, which was technically true. Now here's where the real twist comes in, and I want you to understand that I did not plan for this part. This one fell into my lap through nothing but timing and honesty. When the landlord received my certified letter and realized what had happened, he didn't just drop the matter. He took it very seriously. Because here's the thing about landlords that most tenants forget. They are running a legal business, and fraudulent representations made to them in writing are a direct legal liability. Marcus hadn't just tried to maneuver me out of the apartment. He had given the landlord false written information, which meant the landlord himself had been deceived in a way that could have exposed him to legal risk. The landlord opened an investigation. He reviewed all communications. He pulled every email, every text message he had from Marcus. And what he found was a pattern of misrepresentation that went beyond our little situation. Apparently, Marcus had also told the landlord that certain repairs I had reported were handled, when they hadn't been. He had told him that a noise complaint filed against the unit had been resolved, when it was actually still open. The landlord had been making decisions based on false information for months. Within 6 weeks of my letter, Marcus received a notice of lease violation. Then, when he failed to adequately address it, he received a notice of lease termination. Not me. Him. Let me say that one more time so it lands properly. The man who tried to remove me from my own apartment ended up losing that apartment entirely, while I stayed. The girlfriend had already moved half her wardrobe in. He had to call her and explain what happened. I never said a word to either of them about any of it. I just went about my life, kept paying my rent on time, kept every communication professional, and let the truth do what truth does when you give it room to breathe. There's something I want to talk about here because I think it's the most important part of this whole story, and it gets overlooked when people focus on the outcome. The revenge, if you want to call it that, was not something I manufactured. I didn't lie. I didn't manipulate anyone. I didn't plant evidence or orchestrate some elaborate scheme. All I did was refuse to accept a false narrative, document the truth, and let the people with actual authority see clearly what was happening. That is the cleanest kind of justice there is. And it is available to anyone who is willing to slow down, think clearly, and trust that facts, actual documented facts, carry more weight than schemes and confidence games. A lot of people in my position would have fought fire with fire. They would have started spreading rumors, blocking accounts, trying to get back at him socially, dragging the whole situation into a mess that would have made everyone look bad. And here's what that path gets you: temporary satisfaction, maximum stress, and a landlord who decides both tenants are problems and evicts everyone. I've seen it happen. I've watched people win the argument and lose the apartment. I chose a different path. And the thing about choosing your battle strategically rather than emotionally is that the people who came at you with confidence, the ones who were so sure they had already won, are the ones who fall the hardest. Because they never saw the ground shifting beneath them. After Marcus left, the dynamic in the apartment completely changed. I had the place to myself for nearly 2 months before the landlord helped me find a new co-tenant through a proper screening process. Someone who'd actually been vetted. Someone whose name was on the lease from day one, no tricks, no side conversations. And I'll be honest with you, those 2 months alone were some of the most peaceful I'd had in years. I cooked when I wanted. I watched whatever I wanted. I sat in the quiet and felt the strange, unfamiliar satisfaction of knowing that every choice I'd made in that situation had been the right one. Not just in terms of outcome, but in terms of who I had been throughout it. That matters to me. It probably matters to you too, even if you haven't consciously thought about it that way. How you handle betrayal says something about you. Not to the person who betrayed you, they're usually not paying that much attention. But to yourself. To the version of you that you have to live with every single day after the situation resolves. I've talked to a lot of people who went scorched earth when they felt wronged. And nearly all of them, when they're really honest about it, will tell you that even when it worked, even when the other person suffered the way they'd hoped, it didn't feel as good as they expected. Because destruction, even when it's deserved, doesn't give you back what was taken. What gave me peace wasn't watching Marcus pack his boxes. It was knowing that I had never once compromised my integrity to get there. I told the truth. I followed the process. I let the facts speak for themselves. And the facts were enough. I want to leave you with something practical because the Payback Files isn't just about satisfying stories, it's about equipping you. So here is what I'd tell anyone who finds themselves in a situation where someone is trying to push them out, gaslight them, or quietly undermine their rights. Read every document you've ever signed. Seriously. Most people sign leases, contracts, and agreements without truly reading them, and that ignorance is exactly what people like Marcus count on. The moment I sat down with that lease and read it line by line, I changed the entire landscape of what was possible. Document everything. Not obsessively, not in a way that consumes your life, but consistently. Save emails. Screenshot texts. Keep a simple running note of dates and what was said. You may never need it. But if you do, you will be grateful beyond measure that you have it. Consult someone who actually knows the rules. Tenants' rights attorneys, legal aid organizations, housing advocacy groups. These resources exist and most people never use them until it's too late. A single conversation with someone who knows housing law can save you months of anxiety and thousands of dollars. And finally, and this is the one most people skip, don't react, respond. There's a difference. A reaction is immediate, emotional, and usually gives the other person exactly the chaos they were hoping for. A response is measured, intentional, and timed on your terms. When Marcus came to my room and told me to start packing, the best thing I ever did was say I'd think about it and close the door. That pause was where everything began. I sometimes think about where I'd be if I had reacted instead of responded. If I'd gotten angry in that moment, raised my voice, said something I couldn't take back, Marcus would have had ammunition. The conversation would have shifted from his fraudulent behavior to our conflict. The landlord would have seen two messy tenants instead of one honest one and one dishonest one. The entire outcome might have been different. Restraint is a weapon. Not a passive one, a surgical one. And it is dramatically underestimated. The apartment is quiet now. My new roommate knocks before coming into common spaces and asks before finishing the last of anything. It's a small thing, but it's everything. Sometimes the clearest sign that you made the right calls is not some dramatic vindication. It's just the simple, ordinary peace you get to feel when you come home. I think that's what real payback looks like ultimately. Not the other person suffering, though I won't pretend I shed any tears for Marcus. But you standing inside a life that is better than the one they tried to shove you out of. You still there. You still whole. You still you. That's the story. That's the Payback Files. If this hit different for you, you know what to do. Share it with someone who needs it, drop your thoughts below, and stay close because the next story makes this one look mild. I'll see you there.